The gas lamps flickered in the fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, casting long shadows across a city in the midst of profound transformation. The year was 1872, and beneath the grand facades of progress and propriety, the foundations of long-held beliefs were beginning to crack. This was an age when Charles Darwin's theories had already sent tremors through society's understanding of human origins, when industrial smokestacks pierced the sky alongside church spires, and when the certainties of faith faced the relentless advance of scientific discovery. In the heart of London, the British Museum stood as a temple to human knowledge, its halls filled with artifacts from civilizations long buried beneath desert sands. Here, among the countless treasures gathered from the far corners of the empire, a humble engraver named George Smith would soon ignite a firestorm that would shake the very foundations of religious belief. Smith was an unlikely revolutionary. Born into working-class London, he had never attended university, never held an academic position. Yet he possessed something far more valuable than formal credentials: an insatiable curiosity and an extraordinary gift for deciphering the ancient cuneiform script that covered thousands of clay tablets from Mesopotamia. Each evening, after finishing his day's work as an engraver, Smith would spend hours in the museum's basement, methodically piecing together fragments of these ancient texts, learning their secrets one painstaking symbol at a time. The British Museum of 1872 was a far cry from the orderly institution we know today. Its basement was a labyrinth of poorly lit rooms filled with countless unopened crates and uncatalogued artifacts. The study of ancient Near Eastern texts was still in its infancy. The few scholars who could read cuneiform worked in near isolation, their findings often met with skepticism or indifference from the academic establishment. Yet this was also a time of unprecedented archaeological discovery. Expeditions to ancient Mesopotamia were unearthing entire lost cities, and with them, thousands of clay tablets bearing the literature, laws, and myths of civilizations that had flourished long before the writing of the Bible. These discoveries were slowly building pressure beneath the surface of Victorian society, threatening to burst through its carefully maintained veneer of religious certainty. In the gaslit silence of the museum's basement, Smith hunched over his workbench, surrounded by fragments of the past. His fingers, calloused from years of engraving work, traced the wedge-shaped impressions in the clay. Each tablet was a puzzle, each symbol a clue to understanding voices that had been silent for millennia. What drove him was not just scholarly curiosity, but a deeper, more personal quest. Like many Victorians, Smith had been raised with an unshakable faith in biblical authority. Yet with each tablet he deciphered, with each ancient story he unveiled, uncomfortable questions began to surface. The museum's trustees had initially viewed Smith's self-taught expertise with skepticism. Yet his skill in deciphering cuneiform had proven invaluable, earning him a modest position as an assistant in the museum's Assyrian department. Still, he remained an outsider in the scholarly world, his working-class background and lack of formal education marking him as different from his colleagues. What none could have predicted was that this unlikely scholar was about to make a discovery that would send shockwaves through Victorian society. As he worked late into the night, piecing together fragments of a particularly intriguing tablet from the ancient city of Nineveh, Smith had no way of knowing that he was about to uncover evidence that would challenge the very foundations of religious belief. The story that was slowly emerging from the ancient clay was hauntingly familiar. A tale of divine judgment, a great flood, a righteous man chosen to build a vessel of salvation. But this was not the biblical story of Noah. This was something far older, a Mesopotamian myth that predated the book of Genesis by more than 1,000 years. As the implications of his discovery began to dawn on him, Smith's hands trembled, causing his candle to cast wild shadows across the basement walls. The moment of revelation was approaching, and with it a crisis of faith that would echo far beyond the museum's walls. In the streets above, London continued its bustling pace, unaware that in the quiet depths of its greatest museum, a humble engraver was about to challenge everything Victorian society thought it knew about the origins of its most sacred texts. The stage was set for a confrontation between faith and discovery, between tradition and evidence, between the comfortable certainties of the past and the unsettling revelations of the present. As Smith worked through that fateful night, the gas lamps of London cast their uncertain light over a world poised on the brink of change. The age of innocent faith was ending, and a new era of questioning and discovery was about to begin. The tablets beneath his fingers held secrets that would forever change how humanity understood its spiritual heritage, though the price of revealing those secrets would prove to be higher than anyone could have imagined. The moment of revelation came on a cold December evening in 1872. George Smith's hands trembled as he pieced together the fragments of what appeared to be an ancient Mesopotamian epic. The cuneiform text before him told a story that made his blood run cold. A righteous man, chosen by divine decree, building a great vessel to survive a catastrophic flood that would destroy all life. But this wasn't the biblical tale of Noah. This was the Epic of Gilgamesh, written centuries before Genesis was conceived. In the flickering candlelight, Smith read the ancient words aloud. I made go aboard the seed of all living things. I caused to go up into the ship all my family and relatives, the beasts of the field, the craftsmen. The parallels were undeniable. As the full implications of his discovery dawned on him, Smith did something entirely out of character for a Victorian gentleman. He began to strip off his clothes in excitement, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had found. The Daily Telegraph's headline the next day would capture the public's imagination. Remarkable discovery, Babylonian account of the deluge. The newspaper's editors recognized the explosive potential of Smith's finding, sponsoring him to continue his work in Mesopotamia. This wasn't just academic curiosity, it was sensation, controversy, and the promise of more revelations to come. The response from Victorian society was immediate and polarizing. In academic circles, Smith's discovery sparked intense debate. Some scholars embraced the implications, seeing them as evidence of the Bible's historical context. Others reacted with hostility, viewing the findings as a threat to religious authority. The British Museum's lecture hall was packed when Smith presented his findings, with clergy, scholars, and curious members of the public crowding in to hear him speak. But it was in religious circles that the reaction was most profound. Church leaders who had long proclaimed the Bible's absolute originality now faced uncomfortable questions. How could they explain these ancient parallels? Some attempted to argue that the Babylonian story was a corrupted version of the biblical account, despite clear evidence of its earlier origin. Others suggested that both stories reflected a common historical event, preserved through different cultural traditions. The implications went far beyond the flood narrative. As Smith and other scholars continued their work, they uncovered more parallels between biblical stories and older Mesopotamian myths. The creation story, the Garden of Eden, the concept of divine punishment, all found echoes in texts that predated the Bible by centuries. Each discovery added weight to a revolutionary idea. The Bible, rather than being directly dictated by divine inspiration, was part of a broader ancient Near Eastern literary and religious tradition. For Smith personally, the discoveries brought both triumph and turmoil. His findings made him famous in scholarly circles, earning him recognition that would have been unthinkable for a working-class engraver just years before. Yet he also faced criticism and hostility from those who saw his work as an attack on religious faith. In private letters, he wrote of sleepless nights wrestling with the implications of his discoveries for his own beliefs. The Daily Telegraph's sponsorship led Smith to Mesopotamia itself, where he continued his search for ancient texts. Working under harsh conditions, he uncovered more tablets that further confirmed his initial findings. But the expedition took a toll on his health. In 1876, while leading another expedition to Nineveh, Smith contracted dysentery. He died in Aleppo, far from home, at the age of 36. Yet Smith's death did not slow the tide of discovery. Other scholars continued his work, uncovering more evidence that the Bible's stories were part of a rich tapestry of ancient Near Eastern literature. The flood tablet was just the beginning. Archaeological excavations throughout Mesopotamia revealed an uncomfortable truth for religious authorities. Nearly every major element of Genesis had a predecessor in the myths of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. The impact of these discoveries continues to resonate. They forced a fundamental reconsideration of how we understand religious texts and their origins. The comfortable certainty of Victorian faith had to confront the complexity of historical evidence. The price of this knowledge was high. Careers were ruined, reputations destroyed, and lives changed forever. But the truth, once revealed, could not be buried again. The British Museum still houses the tablets that Smith deciphered, their clay surfaces bearing witness to a moment when human understanding of its spiritual heritage changed forever. They remind us that sometimes the most profound discoveries come not from grand expeditions or prestigious universities, but from quiet moments of revelation in basement rooms, when dedicated individuals dare to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Frederick Delitzsch stood before Kaiser Wilhelm I in 1902, the weight of his revelations heavy on his shoulders. The son of a prominent Lutheran theologian, he was about to deliver the most controversial lectures of his career. Known as the Babel und Bibel, Babylon and Bible presentations, these lectures would lay bare the extensive borrowing of biblical narratives from older Mesopotamian sources. As he spoke, he could see the Kaiser's face darken with each new revelation. The narratives of creation, of paradise and the fall, of the deluge, Delitzsch declared, are full to overflowing with Babylonian elements. The Kaiser, a devout Christian, visibly recoiled. The implications were clear and devastating. The sacred text revered by millions as unique divine revelation was in fact deeply rooted in pagan mythology. The response was swift and brutal. Within days, Delitzsch found himself branded a heretic, his professional reputation in tatters. But Delitzsch wasn't alone in facing such persecution. William Robertson Smith, a brilliant Scottish theologian and comparative religion scholar, endured an even more public humiliation. Between 1877 and 1881, the Free Church of Scotland subjected him to a heresy trial that would become a defining moment in the conflict between faith and scholarship. Smith's crime? Suggesting that biblical narratives were not divine revelations dropped from heaven, but rather echoed earlier Semitic myths and traditions. The trial was a spectacle designed to shame him into silence. Day after day he faced hostile questioning, his academic integrity attacked, his faith questioned. Despite his eloquent defense and sound scholarship, the verdict was predetermined. Smith was suspended from his professorship, his income cut off, his reputation savaged. The pattern of persecution continued with Julius Wellhausen, whose documentary hypothesis suggested that Genesis was composed from multiple human sources. The pressure became so intense that Wellhausen eventually resigned from his theological position, writing poignantly, "I became a theologian because the scientific treatment of the Bible interested me. But gradually I came to understand that a professor of theology also has the practical task of preparing students for service in the Protestant Church, and I am not equal to this." Behind these public confrontations lay a deeper struggle. Religious institutions weren't just defending specific interpretations of Scripture. They were fighting to maintain their authority in an increasingly secular world. The evidence these scholars presented threatened not just biblical literalism, but the very foundations of religious power structures. Samuel Noah Kramer's work in the mid-20th century further intensified the conflict. His decipherment of Sumerian texts revealed even more direct antecedents to biblical narratives. Conservative communities banned his books, religious institutions blacklisted him, and he faced vicious attacks in conservative media. Yet Kramer persisted, driven by a commitment to historical truth that transcended religious controversy. The cost of pursuing truth was personal as well as professional. Many scholars faced ostracism from their communities, strained family relationships, and crisis of faith. Their discoveries forced them to confront difficult questions about the nature of revelation and the relationship between faith and historical fact. Hermann Gunkel, who pioneered the study of Genesis through comparative mythology, found himself shut out from conservative theological institutions, despite his groundbreaking scholarship. His work demonstrated how biblical authors had transformed older mythological motifs into vehicles for monotheistic faith. But such nuanced analysis found little appreciation among those who demanded absolute biblical uniqueness. The resistance wasn't scholarly disagreement. It was institutional panic. The evidence these scholars presented couldn't be refuted through normal academic debate. Instead, their opponents attacked their character, questioned their motives, and sought to silence them through social and professional isolation. Yet the truth they uncovered couldn't be suppressed. Each tablet unearthed from ancient sands, each text deciphered from crumbling clay, added to the overwhelming evidence that biblical narratives were part of a broader, ancient Near Eastern cultural conversation. The price for revealing this truth was high, but these scholars' commitment to intellectual honesty never wavered. Their stories serve as a testament to the cost of pursuing truth when it challenges established power. They remind us that progress in human understanding often comes not through comfortable consensus, but through the courage of individuals willing to face persecution for the sake of truth. The battle they fought wasn't just about ancient texts. It was about the fundamental right to question, to investigate, and to follow evidence wherever it leads. As these scholars faced their trials, they demonstrated that true faith need not fear historical truth. Their legacy lives on in modern biblical scholarship, which continues to explore the rich cultural context from which the Bible emerged. Though they paid dearly for their discoveries, they opened the way for a deeper, more nuanced understanding of humanity's religious heritage. The evidence that emerged from a century of scholarship remains incontrovertible. Consider the Garden of Eden narrative in Genesis. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This seemingly unique story finds its predecessor in the Sumerian concept of Dilmun, described in texts dating to 2100 BCE, nearly a millennium before Genesis was composed. In the Sumerian myth of Enki and Ninhursag, Dilmun is portrayed as a pure place, a clean place, where suffering and death did not exist. As scholar Samuel Noah Kramer definitively stated, Eden is simply the Hebrew transformation of the Sumerian Dilmun. The parallels extend beyond mere setting. They encompass fundamental themes about humanity's relationship with the divine and the nature of mortality itself. Even more striking are the similarities between the biblical creation of humans and earlier Mesopotamian accounts. Genesis describes God forming man from dust and breathing life into him. This mirrors the much older Akkadian Atrahasis epic, where the goddess Mami creates humans by mixing clay with the blood of a slaughtered god. The conceptual parallel is unmistakable. Humanity formed from earth, animated by divine essence. Modern archaeology continues to uncover evidence supporting these connections. The discovery of the Ugaritic tablets revealed striking parallels between the biblical serpent and the Canaanite deity Horon. The Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library have provided new insights into how ancient religious texts evolved and influenced each other. Yet these discoveries raise profound questions for contemporary society. How do we reconcile historical evidence with religious faith? What does it mean when sacred texts show clear signs of cultural borrowing? Modern scholars like Dr. Mark S. Smith of Princeton Theological Seminary suggest that divine inspiration might work through cultural adaptation, allowing ancient writers to reshape existing narratives for new theological purposes. The implications extend beyond academic debate. Today's religious communities face similar challenges when scientific discoveries or historical evidence appears to contradict traditional beliefs. The reaction to evolutionary theory in some educational systems mirrors the Victorian response to biblical archaeology. The same institutional panic, the same attempt to suppress or discredit uncomfortable evidence, persists. Yet, there's also hope in how some religious communities have embraced these discoveries. Many modern theologians see the Bible's connection to older myths as evidence of its deep cultural roots, rather than a challenge to its spiritual significance. They argue that understanding the historical context enriches rather than diminishes religious meaning. The legacy of those early scholars, Smith, Delitzsch, Kramer, and others, lives on in contemporary debates about science, faith, and authority. Their experiences remind us that the pursuit of truth often comes at a personal cost, but that cost is necessary for human understanding to advance. As we face our own challenges, climate change denial, resistance to medical science, the spread of misinformation, the pattern they encountered remains relevant. When evidence challenges deeply held beliefs, the initial response is often rejection, followed by attempts to discredit the messenger rather than engage with the message. Yet their story also offers hope. Despite institutional resistance, despite personal cost, truth eventually prevails. The tablets they deciphered still speak to us across millennia, reminding us that human understanding grows not through comfortable certainty, but through the courage to question, to investigate, and to follow evidence wherever it leads. The real lesson may be not about ancient texts at all, but about human nature. Our capacity to both resist and embrace new understanding, our struggle between comfort and truth, our ability to eventually transcend traditional limitations in pursuit of deeper knowledge. As modern society faces its own confrontations between evidence and belief, the echo of those Victorian scholars' courage continues to resonate. In the end, perhaps the most profound discovery isn't what archaeology reveals about Genesis, but what our reaction to such discoveries reveals about ourselves. The story of these scholars and their findings challenges us to examine our own relationship with truth, especially when that truth disrupts our comfortable assumptions about the world and our place in it. The story of these Victorian scholars resonates deeply with our modern struggles to navigate truth in an increasingly complex world. Like them, we often find ourselves caught between comfortable certainties and challenging new realities. Whether facing technological disruption in our careers, adapting to changing social values, or reconciling traditional beliefs with new understanding, their journey mirrors our own. Their experiences teach us that growth often requires courage to question long-held assumptions. Just as Smith and his colleagues faced institutional resistance while pursuing truth, we too encounter resistance when challenging established ways of thinking, in our workplaces, our communities, and even within our families. Yet their perseverance shows us that the pursuit of understanding, though sometimes painful, ultimately enriches both individual lives and society as a whole. Perhaps most importantly, their story reminds us that intellectual honesty need not diminish deeply held values. Many of these scholars maintain their faith while expanding their understanding, demonstrating that growth and tradition can coexist. This lesson is particularly relevant as we help our children and grandchildren navigate a world where old certainties are constantly challenged by new discoveries. The tablets they deciphered tell us something profound about human nature. Our capacity to both resist and embrace change, our struggle between comfort and truth, our ability to eventually transcend our limitations. As we face our own moments of truth, whether personal or professional, their courage can inspire us to embrace growth rather than retreat into comfortable ignorance. In the end, their legacy isn't just about ancient texts, it's about the timeless human journey toward greater understanding and the wisdom to recognize that truth, though sometimes challenging, ultimately leads to deeper meaning and connection. If this journey through history has sparked your curiosity or challenged your thinking, I'd love to hear your perspective. What moments in your life have you faced the challenge of reconciling new truths with established beliefs? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For more deep dives into how ancient discoveries continue to shape our understanding of human culture and belief, subscribe to our channel. New episodes exploring similar fascinating historical revelations are released every week. If you found value in this story, please consider sharing it with others who might appreciate this exploration of truth, faith, and human courage. Your shares help these important historical lessons reach a wider audience. And if you enjoyed this content, hitting the like button helps our channel grow and allows us to continue producing in-depth historical investigations like this one.